Welcome to the 23rd episode of the It's Been Said podcast. I'm your host, SAI Executive Director Lisa Remy. Each show is dedicated to conversations on leadership as we further SAI's mission to support, encourage, and develop Iowa's educational leaders and learners. I'm very excited today to welcome our guest, Dr. Ian Roberts, the Des Moines Public Schools Superintendent. Welcome, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you, Lisa. It's good to be on with you today.
So let's first start, Dr. Roberts, by you introducing yourself to our listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be on and excited to really share some of my insights and experiences with our listeners today. I'm excited about the fact that I am currently going into my second year as superintendent of the Moines Public Schools. Of course, Iowa's largest, most culturally and linguistically diverse school system. But prior to coming to Des Moines Public Schools, I also served as a superintendent outside of Erie, Pennsylvania, for 3 years. But my journey to education started as a special education teacher, and I have since dedicated so much of my work to working and serving in large or mid-sized urban school systems. I often anchor my approach to not only education but leadership in what I consider to be a culturally responsive or an empathetic approach to both teaching and leading. So excited to be here and to be a part of the Iowa education family.
Yeah, well, we're so excited to hear from you, Dr. Roberts, and that you took a little bit of time out of your very busy schedule. I know how busy your schedule is, so thank you again. And you mentioned you started your career as a special education teacher. Talk about how that experience influenced your leadership approach today and the decisions that you make for your district based on that, how that has influenced your work.
Absolutely. So, special education teachers, right, and I certainly have a little bit of a bias, but they are a special breed or special group of professionals. These are the individuals who are tasked with serving our highest need students. And in many instances, what many will not even argue are some of our most historically marginalized groups of students. The special education community is something that I learned very on, having served as a special education teacher for close to 8 years. We often say that special education is a service and it's not a place, right? So that allows us to continue to anchor every decision that we make through the lens of a service delivery model. Special education is the epitome of a pre-K-12 service delivery model that truly prioritizes specific academic, behavioral, and the social emotional needs of all of our students. And so those experiences certainly continue to show up daily in my work as a superintendent.
So Dr. Roberts, how do you ensure those principles that you just described for your special education students, those individualized, are applied to all students in the district?
Not only do I model, right, what it means to recognize and acknowledge that every single student who knocks on the doors of each of our 64 schools here in the Moines Public Schools, recognizing and acknowledging that each of them have a very unique learning style, and they come to us with learning modalities that requires us to be very flexible, requires us to commit to differentiating our approaches, not only with those students, but also to differentiate the approaches with their relatives, with their guardians, with their parents, with community members. And so that's the approach that I often take when I think about how just having the focus on individualized support allows us to apply those tenets to all the students in the district.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. So as you know, the Summer Olympics are about to begin Friday night, opening ceremonies, right?
That's right.
Some of our listeners may not know that you are an Olympian who raced in the 2000 Sydney Games. So what lessons in leadership did you gain from your Olympic and other track and field experiences?
Yeah, Lisa. So in addition to the fact that the first comparison that comes to mind is, as an Olympic athlete, of course, because of the intensity of and physical nature of the sport, we sweat a lot. In the superintendency, there's so many decisions that we make that probably cause us to sweat a lot as well. But no, I think there are several similarities between effective schools and district leaders and Olympians, right? The few that comes to mind for me, one, Olympians and school leaders and district leaders are required to have relentless discipline in order to succeed. Both Olympians and school leaders are expected to have a focus on goal setting, and also, right, to be committed to effective progress monitoring so that they will know when they're improving, where there are needs to make adjustments, and when to pivot as necessary, right? Olympians and school and district leaders also need to understand and recognize that sometimes in the pursuit of excellence, while it appears to be an individual effort, it's a team effort that will get you across the finish line. And even though you may be celebrated or rewarded and glorified because of your individual achievements, you have to always keep in mind that it's a team sport in many instances. And finally, what I'll say, and while this is not an exhaustive list of the comparisons, regardless of how well you are prepared as an Olympic athlete, in my case, I remember training 6 days a week for 2 years nonstop, 3 times a day. And while the outcome at the Olympic Games, going into the games, is one of the fastest men in the world, at one point having the top 10 fastest time in my event, I did not get to the desired outcome. And oftentimes in the superintendency or even in the principalship, you realize that while the outcome may not be what you desire, what you wanted, what you trained and planned for, you just have to keep going.
Yeah, you speak of that. That makes me think about perseverance, right?
Yes.
And how we need to continue as leaders, just like athletes, right, to persevere through. So, Dr. Roberts, when we think about that performance, there's a lot of, you talked about training for 3 times a day for many years. So you think about that on the physical side. But then there's also that mental side, right? As you're planning, preparing for the Olympic side of it. But when you think about both of those, the physical as well as the mental well-being, how do you ensure for students when they're pursuing that academic excellence that we also consider and make sure we're helping them pursue that, mental well-being, that social emotional side?
It is so critical. Oftentimes I would remind those with whom I work and encourage them to make sure that we are practicing the tenets of what I refer to as Olympic level leadership. And what that means and is that we think about the physical strength that is required, right? So in track and field, for example, we at the elite level, we often say that our performance is only 10% physical, but it's 90% mental. And so some of the areas that I continue to impress upon teammates, especially those at a leadership level, includes one, to always prioritize people over politics, policies, protocols, and past practices, because this allows us to humanize those with whom we are coming into contact, especially our students, right? Because you referenced, Lisa, the importance of social emotional learning. I often encourage them to make sure that every single day that we are highlighting and elevating the 5 tenets or competencies of SEL, right? Both for students as well as for adults. Additionally, I often talk about the importance for us to lead, teach, and serve with empathy, right? Being willing to recognize who our students are, what their lived experiences have been, and how can we make sure that we are making decisions to elevate those experiences, and to also have the same approach for the adults who are serving our children. And as I think about SEL and its applicability to the adults, we have to, as superintendents, cultivate environments that truly prioritizes the psychological safety for the adults that we're serving. Because, when we think about, for example, our retention rate for teachers and leaders, many of whom are not necessarily at the age of retirement, but they are leaving the profession. Oftentimes, what we have found in many of our exit interviews, it's a very simple response, but one that is profound, and that is people are exhausted. They're exhausted mentally. They're leaving the profession because they have not felt supported, cared for, seen. And so we have to make sure that we are truly highlighting and implementing the tenets of social emotional learning, not only for children, that we serve, but for the adults. And the last thing that I'll say, oftentimes in passing, I would remind leaders, teachers, staff, that while we want to make sure that academic excellence is at the forefront of our minds, we should think about this dichotomous relationship between Maslow versus Bloom's, right? So we have to first meet the basic needs of our students and our teachers before we start to think about inundating them with a rigorous curriculum or instructional program. So Maslow versus Bloom's, at the risk of an oversimplification, that's one way for us to make sure that we're meeting the social emotional needs of our teachers as well as the students.
I really appreciate you bringing up meeting those needs for the adults in the building as well, because if it would be really difficult for them to help their students and the students meet those needs if the adults aren't already meeting, feeling safe, feeling heard, as well. Yeah, appreciate that. So, competing at the highest level teaches resilience and adaptability. Can you provide an example of a challenge you faced as a superintendent where you drew upon those lessons from your Olympic time to find a solution?
Absolutely, man. There are so many examples and comparisons that I can think about, especially as I sort of reflect on how in athletics at the highest level, you need to, be resilient and also to be adaptable, right? So in my 4 years as a superintendent and certainly 2 terms in the superintendency, the one that comes to mind for me, the example, is the recognition that a superintendent's daily responsibility is so dynamic in nature, right? As such, similar to Olympic athletes, regardless of your skills, your abilities, and the capacity that you have, you can get into spaces where you do not achieve success, right? So, and oftentimes when we rely on our technical prowess, our technical skills, both in the superintendency or as an elite athlete, we will find ourselves in places where failure or the inability to achieve a desired outcome can become so daunting. I think where it does not become daunting is when you sort of start to prioritize, right? What Ron Heifetz out of Harvard University in the book Leadership on the Line reminds us that our ability to develop our adaptive leadership muscles can allow us to overcome any challenge in the workplace, particularly in leadership. And so when I think about what really drives and inspires my commitment to resilience and adaptability is the recognition that while I know that my technical skills can be helpful in this journey, in this pursuit, I am continuously and with intentionality focused on building my adaptive leadership muscles.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing in that technical versus adaptive leadership, because what I've found over time in talking with different leaders is we have tried to put technical responses onto situations that really require that adaptive side. And so that's the muscle that we need to continue to try to develop as leaders. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that. So
Absolutely.
as you mentioned when you introduced yourself, you've been the superintendent for Des Moines Public Schools. You came in last July, so just a year now, moving from Pennsylvania. We were so excited right away in August to see you at our annual convention. How do you prioritize your learning with all the numerous commitments that you have as a superintendent?
Yeah, thank you. It's one of the most sort of challenging aspects of managing and navigating the superintendent's schedule. But I also recognize, Lisa, that it's imperative to model continuous learning as a superintendent, and I do so by investing in opportunities that will improve and refine my skills, my decision-making approach to complex issues, because complex issues really characterizes, right, the superintendent's role. And so seeking out opportunities for continuous learning. Opportunities, for example, and you referenced this, such as the SAI annual conference. I haven't attended that last year, and the connections made and the relationships built, and I'm looking forward to attending again this year and in future years. That attendance and also seeking out other opportunities has really added tremendous value to my leadership journey in this role here in the superintendency. As such, I often seek out other opportunities, as many as possible, to connect with colleagues and peers, not only here in Des Moines or in Central Iowa, but across the entire state and certainly nationally. I truly believe that the adage "iron sharpens iron" really helps us to remain steadfast in doing really exciting and impactful work in the superintendency. So I'm constantly looking for opportunities to connect with peers and colleagues. Additionally, as a superintendent, I think it goes without saying that one must be a voracious and an avid reader, right? You want to be able to consume as many books and as many articles that are credible and reliable as possible, and it keeps me sharp.
Yeah, reading's important. And I love it that you're modeling that learning, right? We need to be lead learners as superintendents, as building level leaders. We model that for our staff and for our students, families. So thank you for referencing that. So you're the superintendent of the largest district in the state. Occasionally you hear districts referenced as school systems as well. What approaches have you found successful in creating and sustaining a system that will benefit all learners, teachers, staff, community, regardless of size?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some, again, I reference what I have sort of coined and shared as Olympic level leadership. And that is, just really taking a long, deep look, not only at the practices that are being utilized across high performing districts nationally, but also looking at some of those practices that a number of organizations, right, in the business industry, in the military, or in our health services industry, those that are doing very well, what are the practices that they have adopted to make them, in many instances, 10x companies, right? So in terms of the specifics to me as a pre-K-12 school district leader, there are a few that comes to mind. One, ensuring that there's a scope and sequence for ongoing professional development opportunities for 100% of our teammates. We have to make sure that every single person who serves and meet the needs of students have as many opportunities as possible to improve their craft, to have capacity built. Additionally, we have to make sure that we are cultivating a strong, collaborative, and authentic professional relationship with many of our stakeholders, right, including our collective bargaining groups. You want to have a positive collegial relationship with those individuals. You want to have such a similar relationship with our politicians, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. You want to make sure that you're continuously galvanizing the collective strength, intellectual abilities of our community partners. Our community partners truly want to make sure that they are contributing to and adding value to our school system. So we shouldn't miss opportunities to do so. I also spend a lot of time, right, constantly and frequently reminding every single adult charged with serving children that we have to anchor our decisions in credible and relevant quantitative and qualitative data always. But while we are doing that, while we are priding ourselves in many instances of being data literate, there's always the reminder that at the end of every single one of those data points, they are either children or teachers and adults who serve them. So those are, some of the approaches that I tend to utilize to ensure that the system of schools that we have truly benefits all learners, including teachers, staff, and community, regardless of size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. So we've really enjoyed seeing you around the community, including your much publicized race with a few of your elementary students. So what approach do you take, Dr. Roberts, to engage with the community? And then what suggestions do you have for our listeners, other leaders looking to increase their engagement with their school community?
Absolutely. So my approach to increasing engagement with community, it's threefold. One is the recognition that there is no substitute for your presence, and presence that is not just physical, but where you have high engagement. And so at least once a week, my schedule is as such that I spend time in no less than 2 of our schools, right? And that time is spent interacting with students, speaking and engaging with them to understand what it is that they need and how we can better serve them. And also spending time observing teachers and leaders to try to get a better sense of how can we make sure that we are making decisions at a central office to support their practice to become instructional leaders. The second approach is to make sure that you have calendared out community meetings. I have community meetings at least once a month. The third Friday of every month, I have what I call either coffee or tea with the superintendent, and it's where I go into different parts of the community each month and have an open meeting where I invite parents and community members of the business sort of sphere, as well as politicians, to come and sit with me to share what are some of the celebrations, right? What are some of the things they like that is happening in the Moines Public Schools, but also to share where are their concerns and issues that they want us to address, and then for them to share how can we partner to get better. And then finally, the third approach to making sure that we are engaging with the community is to make sure that we are consistently inviting members of the community to come to our board meetings, not just when there are times of issues and crises, but to be there to offer their thoughts, perspective, and insights, because we have so much richness in terms of information and expertise in our communities, and we want to make sure that we're leveraging those and taking advantage of it so that we can be better as a school system.
Mm. What I hear is you make yourself available, which that availability and that presence is so very important to relationships, but then to getting, moving work forward and doing what's right for kids. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So we know that there's been lots of talk, both in our state in Iowa, but nationally, about chronic absenteeism. And it's a concern. We've seen absenteeism rates increase in Iowa. So how does family engagement impact student attendance from your perspective?
It is critical. It's one of the fundamental issues and concerns that we have, because we know that there's a correlation between how we engage with families, how we support families, and chronic absenteeism, right? We often say that it is clear to us that students are voting with their feet. Mm-hmm. And the reason that many students are becoming a part of that data point that suggests that they're chronically absent is because there's something happening that oftentimes in the schoolhouse we think is not something that we can do as a school system. Chronic absenteeism truly is symptomatic of some larger social and societal issues facing our families. And so what we have done here in the Moines Public Schools, and will continue to build upon this, is to make sure that we are approaching the chronic absenteeism crisis not from a punishment or enforcement sort of perspective, but more from the exploration of a more humanistic and social service approach, right? So we have created, for example, a campaign in which we've involved 100% of the 5,000 employees in this school system to ensure that they understand when we say that every day matters, and that's the sort of the tagline of our campaign, every day truly matters. Additionally, we have created attendance teams, and these teams are looking at a lot of the data, both quantitative and qualitative data that impacts our absenteeism rates. And this includes going to the homes of our students and knocking on our doors. One step that I've taken, again, because I believe in truly modeling what is expected as the superintendent or CEO of this district. So I've gotten the names, for example, of 7 students across grade level bands who are listed as chronically absent. And I've knocked on their doors to have conversations with their parents and with them about why their absences are so high. And the data and information that I have gathered and others have gathered will continue to drive and inspire our commitment to make sure that we are creating a much more sort of sophisticated service delivery approach to meet the needs of our parents and our families and our students. And so chronic absenteeism, while we have 3 board goals that we will focus on next year, I have been sharing with community members that the 4th goal that we have, which is the superintendent's goal, is how do we address the issue of chronic absenteeism to ensure that our students can truly find themselves in seats and benefit from the world-class education that we want to provide to them. And it's something that I'm willing and ready to share with some of my other peers and colleagues, because I believe that solid thought partnership to address chronic absenteeism amongst my superintendent colleagues will get us to at least coming up with some solutions, if not a panacea right away.
Yeah, it's one of those where you need to really think adaptive, right? That adaptive leadership around absenteeism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So, you have published a few books in your time. And so, most recently, the book that you wrote, Radical Empathy and Leadership, Equity Focused Testimonials, Trials, and Tools for School Leaders. Can you describe for our listeners an empathetic leader and why this is important for school leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. That publication is one that I'm incredibly proud of, and the reason it's because just in addition to sort of approaching this writing from a theoretical place, I spent an inordinate amount of time, close to 10 years, interviewing school district leaders and teachers and capturing their experiences. And one of the common themes or common denominators that I found is those who have been incredibly successful have exercised a willingness to truly, walk a mile in the shoes of those that they're serving, to truly try to understand the lived experiences of every single student who knock on their doors, and also understand the lived experiences of the adults who serve alongside them every single day. And so, an empathetic leader, right, is one who certainly wants to make decisions anchored in what is going to truly meet the needs of those that they're serving, regardless of their lived experiences or background. But a radically empathetic leader is one who truly understands what it means to be empathetic, but also is willing to disrupt systems of inequities and the status quo in order to truly meet the needs of those that they're serving. And so, oftentimes I remind individuals not to shy away from the term radically empathetic leader, because when we look at sort of the radical in that designation, we often think of the noun radical. And I share with them, when you think of radical as the noun, you often have this negative connotation. But think of radical, the verb, because radical by its very definition is, again, the willingness to change the way that something has been done in the past. And so I encourage them to verbalize, right? Radical is as opposed to thinking of it as a noun, and to become a radically empathetic leader, to meet the needs of every single person that you are teaching, leading, or serving by first trying to understand what has been their lived experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. So, given the significant contrast between Jack Welch's leadership approach and the more empathetic and developmental model proposed in your book, The Power of 7 Second Chances, Obtaining Team and Organizational Success Without Firing the Rest, how do you reconcile, right, the undeniable success of Welch's productivity-driven method with the potential long-term benefits of fostering a collaborative and compassionate workplace environment?
Absolutely. Those of us who have been students of leadership, Lisa, and have studied some of our more successful, and I'm using air quotes when I use successful to describe Jack Welch, while GE achieved the bottom line year after year for a very long period of time, when you do conduct a deeper dive into the model, you are going to realize that there were significant negative impacts on those individuals who are actually doing the work, who were on the sort of the machine in line. The retention rate of individuals who had dedicated their lives and committed to working for the organization was rather low, right? Jack Welch's approach was to only hire individuals who had impeccable resumes, who were high performers, and to ignore the majority of individuals, probably about 90%, who were dedicated, who were committed to learning and improving, and who tend to focus a lot on being empathetic by humanizing their approach in the work. In the pre-K-12 education space, when I think about a comparative sort of research that I often think about when I think about Jack Welch's work is I think about the new teacher project. I think it's a 2013 research on the irreplaceables, when they were looking at and examining why weren't districts retaining their highest performing teachers and leaders. And the one thing that stood out is the fact that in GE, they were not necessarily trying to meet the needs through offering professional development for individuals who were not coming into the organization high performing. In the pre-K-12 education space, we have to maintain a high level of commitment to recruiting individuals and investing in them by providing targeted and differentiated professional development. And so my approach will always be one that is the antithesis of the Jack Welch approach, and that is recognizing that the cavalry isn't coming if we're going to recruit and retain high-performing teachers and leaders, we have to make sure that we're willing to invest in them. And so, that's my approach, where I not necessarily criticize Jack Welch's approach, but recognize that I want to make sure that we're not using the same approach in pre-K-12 education. We cannot fire our way to success. We have to build capacity in and offer professional development opportunities that are targeted and differentiated to meet the needs of our adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. So what inspired you, and quite frankly, where did you find the time, I wonder, Dr. Roberts, to co-author another book, The Dangerous Indifference, The Case for Culturally Responsive Leadership? And then besides what inspired you, how does that information contained in that book connect to school leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the inspiration came more from a place of seeking out and desiring to find the kind of strategic approaches to make sure that we are being responsive to the obvious changes that are happening in the pre-K-12 arena, right? We know that, one of the data points that came out of the Department of Education is that beginning in the fall of 2014, for the very first time, we saw that the 51.5 million children who are enrolled in pre-K-12 schools in this country, for the very first time in the fall of 2014, about 50.5% of them were considered minority students or students of color. But what hasn't changed is the fact that our cadre of amazing teachers, when we looked at the demographic data, was still hovering around between 86 to 89% white. And so Dangerous Indifference was inspired by this data point in a recognition that it is clear that many of our teachers and leaders did not have the very same lived experiences as the students that they're serving every single day. And the indifference that can show up sometimes usually take on a very dangerous sort of connotation or the practical aspect of it, because we were teaching the same way and leading the same way that we've led, even when the demographic makeup of our student body was very different. And so the Case for Culturally Responsive Leadership also looked at that data and the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings that really says, look, in order for us to improve and impact the academic, social, and behavioral outcomes of our students, we need to make sure that we have a commitment to understanding not only their cultural and lived experiences, but for us to become more introspective and do a deeper dive around the lived experiences and our own cultural pursuits. And so this connects to school leaders in a way that have shown us that, based on the data that we've looked at in interviews, that when school leaders are ready to show up in a manner that is culturally responsive, there's a trickle-down effect. Not only are they able to galvanize and inspire the collective energy and inspire the teachers and staff who work in their districts, but the trickle-down effect goes from those teachers and staff to students, and it increases areas such as academic performance, reduces absenteeism, and increases and improves the sense of belonging the students feel, because they're seeing how you're showing up in a manner that truly values their cultural experiences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your expertise, your talents, your knowledge with our listeners. One final question, though. Generally, to all school leaders, whether it's assistant principals or superintendents, what advice do you have for them?
It's very simple. The work that we are pursuing, the calling that has been bestowed upon us, is the most important work, is the most important sort of civil rights pursuit of our lifetime. And we have to be willing and ready to disrupt the status quo if we're truly going to serve not only students, not only to lead teachers, but to serve the communities where we are embedded to do this work. So make sure that we are courageous, we are bold, and we are brave in our leadership, and to make sure that we remember in every single decision to prioritize our people over politics, past practices, protocols, or the policies that we have in place.
Yeah, so powerful. Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. Really appreciate you taking time to speak with us today, to be on our podcast and share your knowledge with our listeners. Thank you.
Tremendous thanks to you, Lisa, and the SAI family. I value you and appreciate the work that you're doing for school leaders.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
During our conversation, Dr. Roberts noted it's imperative to model continuous learning as a superintendent. and he does so by investing in opportunities that will improve his skills and decision-making approach to complex issues. At SAI, we're excited to offer various options for you to learn and grow, including the new Leadership Coaching Program. Find out more by entering SAI Leadership Coaching in your internet search or reaching out to the SAI office.